important. I just want to thank you for being a part of the task force, being here, whether you raised your hand to be a part or was nominated. We're just so happy to have you here. Now, I am Serena McElwain, the Secretary of the Department of the Environment. This is our headquarters building, so it's good to have you all here. And for you all virtually, it's good to meet you as well. Hopefully another time we'll see you in person. On to you.
All right. I'm Ian Ullman. I'm a senior energy advisor at MEA. Director Paul Pinsky apologizes. He's just feeling a little under the weather, so he couldn't make it today. But we're really excited to get this task force going. It's been a long time that we've been thinking about planning it. As I think most of you know, right? The director was a senator in a prior life, and he sponsored Climate Solutions Now. And this was a big part of what we were trying to do, right? We know buildings are one of the largest emitters in the state, and so we won't meet our climate goals unless we can figure out how we're going to reduce building emissions. And some of the questions about buildings were answered, I think, in the General Assembly. We obviously have a building emission performance standard that's going to be started that the Secretary and MDE will be administering. But there are big questions still remaining about how we're going to decarbonize buildings, and this group can really play an important role in answering some of those questions. How quickly and on, and what kind of investments should we be making, and what should building owners expect from from government, and what should government expect from building owners? So I think that we're hoping for a really good, productive conversation about some of those questions, and hopefully we'll get some good answers in a pretty short amount of time.
And with that, I'm going to ask that you introduce yourselves. We're going to go rather quickly, so don't tell me everything. Like, I don't want to know the dog's name. Not here. I do want to know your dog's name, though. Just not here. So if you can introduce yourself with your name, title, and I think that's it. And then we'll go to the screen after we do it in person. This is so the task force, and because you all, will it be too much if I ask them just to say their name? All right.
Your prerogative.
All right, good.
Hello, my name is Marshall Dua-Balkind. I'm the Director of Policy with the Institute for Market Transformation, which is serving as a technical partner to MDE, and I'll be helping facilitate these task force meetings and the subgroups. And if you're wondering what subgroups, well, we'll be talking more about that.
Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at MDE. I'm Stuart Taplow. I'm an environmental attorney, and I'm here as chair of the Green Building Council of Maryland.
So good to see you again.
Louisa Rittu. I'm a mechanical engineer at VAP with Baltimore County Government, and I'm here as one of the appointees. Thank you.
Thomas LaQuire. I work for Design, Construction, and Energy. I'm Director of Operations.
Nice to see you.
Hi, I'm Mark Case. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Regulatory for Baltimore Gas and Electric, representing the utility industry.
Susan Miller, I'm Clean Energy Attorney of Earth Justice, which is a nonprofit law firm that represents other nonprofits. I work for the Earth Justice Practice Program. Nicolette Tran, Deputy Director of the Energy Programs at Department of Housing and Community.
Thanks. Nice to meet you. All right, guys. I don't usually do this with a form, but we're going to do it today. So say your name really fast, and if you want to say where you're from, just real fast, lightning fast. We want to know who you are. Quick. We'll start with you.
Cindy Osorno, Policy Analyst of the Climate Change Program at MDE.
Jamal Lewis, Rewiring America.
Allison Brown, intern in the Climate Change Program at FDE. Victoria Husband, intern with the Waterways at FDE.
Barclays, an intern with Waterways.
With Duke Ecology. Ben Adams with the Grant Associates, Sustainability Engineers.
Yes. Safety Director of Energy Sustainability.
Sure, Mark, you want him.
Sure. If there are any task force members who've been appointed who are joining us virtually, if you could go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Best. I'm Deputy Executive Secretary at the Maryland Public Service Commission. I am covering the meeting today for soon-to-be Chair Hoover, who will be attending in the near future after he's confirmed.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Stephen Morrell, CEO of the Montgomery County Green Bank.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everybody. This is Kathy Magruder with the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Sorry not to be there in person today.
Hey, Gabby. Any others online? Appointed task force members?
This is Nick Silbergeld with HASI.
Great, thanks, Nick.
Anthony Roberts, Phase 3 Training Corporation.
Hey, Anthony.
Cherise Seals with Norisco.
Task force charge or to do.
Well, let me just say that first of all, let me acknowledge that there are obviously missing a number of task force members. It's not we want to get something, I think, because we have such a short time frame. Right? Yeah. We owe a report by the end of the year, and so we really isn't. We can afford to wait, but hopefully we'll get those appointees done very quickly. Other than that, I know that at least for there's a copy of the charges from the law that here on people's desks. I don't know if there's an online version. Yeah, but I think that it's important to keep in mind that we're looking at the whole building sector, not just large buildings, which tend to get a lot of attention. But we're not going to be able to meet our climate goals unless we really figure out a way to decarbonize the entire building stock in Maryland, and that I think should not be lost. And then if you look at the charges, it talks a lot about incentives, like I said before. What incentives are needed to, what degree of incentives should be needed, to who should be receiving them in order to make the investments we're going to need to electrify and decarbonize. And that's primarily right to retrofitting, which is the third bullet there under what the task force shall do. So should be.
Thank you. Since I did that again. I Sparks I'm going to manager involved in some of the decarbonization last year. Marshall in a minute to tell you more about
I'm sorry, could you make an effort to speak directly into the microphone? Because it's very choppy for those of us online. We can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure thing. We have the Institute for Market Transformation, RMI, AECOM, Maryland Environmental Service, Rewiring America, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab among the technical assistance partners who are participating in this task force process to help us understand the cost of decarbonizing Maryland's building sector, and especially with AECOM doing some policy level analysis based on the recommendations that the task force members might come up with by this fall, so that we have some ability to help inform the when you forward a recommendation, when you make a recommendation, what would the cost of that be potentially to the state, assuming that your recommendation looks something like a new state program. So we have some technical assistance partners. There's a limit to the amount of technical assistance and analysis that we'll be able to provide, but we have tried to stack up a lot of technical assistance to be able to support this process over the coming months. With that, let me turn it to Marshall to talk a little bit more about IMT's role in this.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. So the Institute for Market Transformation, and for folks on the phone, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you now.
Great, excellent. So the Institute for Market Transformation is a nonpartisan, non-governmental organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., but with staff across the U.S. And I am actually a resident of Maryland. And we work on policies for benchmarking, building standards, energy efficiency in buildings, with the idea of working with private sector and governments to unlock the power of the private sector to decarbonize the building stock through incentives, through policy, and sort of sharing of best practices and working with folks. We also support the White House on the National Building Performance Standards Coalition, which is a coalition of about 44 jurisdictions across the U.S. that have committed to that either have or are committed to adopting building performance standards. And if you didn't see the news, the Governor Westmore this morning announced that Maryland just joined that coalition. So that was pretty exciting. Our role, and we've been funded by philanthropic organizations, including the Energy Foundation, to support the state of Maryland in helping make sure that this is the best structured possible building performance standard, and make sure that the resources are there for the private sector to be able to achieve and exceed those goals while still succeeding as businesses and making money and so forth. So our role here is really a fewfold. One, I'll be facilitating this meeting. I think this meeting will be a lot of presentations, so not probably a ton of facilitating, but I'll be helping out as I can. And then facilitating future meetings. We'll also be launching, as we'll talk about more in a little bit, 4 subgroups focused on various sectors. And myself and other staff from IMT will be running those subgroups over the next few months. We'll also be serving as the lead author of the final report. I mean, the final report of the task force will be the task force's report approved by the task force, but someone has to write the thing, and we have volunteered to help draft the thing, that the report that you all will review and edit and approve over the fall. The goal of getting it done by December 1st per the charge in the legislation, which is why we wanted to get this process going as soon as possible. All task force members being appointed or not notwithstanding. So that's basically just our role here. I'm here to be sort of a technical expert on this, a resource, help work with you all. I am the co-chair of DC's Building Energy Performance Standard Task Force, which is similar to this one in some ways and different in other ways, but I can bring that experience to help support MDE in making sure that this process is a success. So thanks.
Thank you. And thank you.
Is that sufficient?
Oh, perfectly. And thank you very much to IMT for being able to participate in this process and to help in so many ways with it.
It's a pleasure.
So let me pull up the agenda so that everyone has the benefit of following along with what the plan is for the next hour and a half, if we need that much time for this first task force meeting. And there's probably some clever way where I can pin this so that we in the room can also see it larger. But hold on.
We got it. That's pretty good.
A little bit better.
As good as it's going to get, I think.
So what we've covered already, introductions and task force charge. We're going to spend a little bit of time with a quick overview. I'm going to give everyone a very high-level overview of current building decarbonization plans and policies in Maryland. And then we're going to hear a bit from our partners at Rewiring America about some of the new federal level programs that are available to help buildings decarbonize, and then from MEA about state level programs. There's then going to be some discussion about the task force's work plan looking down the road over the next few months, and that'll be more of an opportunity for the task force members to weigh in with what you think the task force should be focused on over the coming months here. And then, as Marshall mentioned, talk about launching some subgroups. We think that there's a lot for the task force to do, and having some open subgroups could really benefit this process to pull more information in on a faster timeline. And then, of course, as is the norm with our public meetings, we do have time for public comments. And then if there's any time left, feel free to grab some cookies and coffee if you're joining us in person today, and enjoying some networking. So very quick lay of the land in terms of where we're coming from. In 2021, MDE released what is the current state's greenhouse gas emission reduction plan. It's called the 2030 GGRA plan. That plan called for a couple of specific things. It said fossil fuel heating needs to be converted to efficient electric heat pumps powered by increasingly clean and renewable electricity, Maryland electricity, and that the Maryland Commission on Climate Change needs to develop a building energy transition plan. By the end of 2021, the Commission on Climate Change had produced its building energy transition plan and called for several new policies, including adopting an all-electric construction code for the state, adopting a clean heat retrofit program that would meet specific targets, including retrofitting 100% of low-income households by 2030, encouraging fuel switching and beneficial electrification through Empower, targeting 95% of heating equipment sales to be heat pumps by 2030, so on and so forth. There were several recommendations within that clean heat retrofit program. And then to create a building emissions standard, the General Assembly, as I'll mention in the next slide, I think, broadened that to be a building energy performance standard, and then also to develop utility transition plans with an important focus on the fact that, decarbonizing the building sector largely looks like electrifying the building sector. That's going to have some implications, especially on gas planning. So that's a really quick overview of some of the discussion and happenings in Maryland in 2021. In 2022, we had the Climate Solutions Now Act passed, and the Climate Solutions Now Act did a number of things. It created nation-leading requirements for Maryland to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, aiming for a 60% reduction in statewide emissions by 2031 and net zero emissions by 2045. It also authorized the agencies to adopt regulations to achieve those emission reduction requirements. It created the building energy performance standards. It gave an extra $5 million a year to DHCD to help affordable housing providers achieve BEPS. BEPS, by the way, you'll hear us refer to a lot. That BEPS is the shorthand for building energy performance standards. It also gave $5 million a year to MCEC to create the Climate Catalytic Capital Fund. It created this Building Energy Transition and Implementation Task Force that we're launching today. It created a Climate Transition and Clean Energy Hub for MEA to stand up to provide technical assistance to building owners to achieve the Building Energy Performance Standards, or BEPS. It created new Empower Maryland goals aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reaching underserved customers. And it also launched a couple of studies to find a pathway to achieve all-electric new construction standards. Those, by the way, are just some of the buildings-related things in the Climate Solutions Now Act. Ian had a fun time writing what I've forgotten the number of pages of the entire act, but it is one of the strongest bits of pieces of climate legislation in the nation. Congrats.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
So that brings us kind of to today. So we are in the process of developing regulations at MDE for building energy performance standards. This is a very quick overview of what those achieve. And it's important to provide this overview because we have a lot of stakeholders involved with this task force that are very focused on what are the new state programs that are going to be provided to help building owners achieve these ambitious standards. So we know that BEPS is going to be a major focus for the task force. Although the task force charge, as Ian mentioned earlier, is meant to be broad, right? How do we decarbonize the entire building sector, not just the 9,000 buildings or so that are covered by BEPS, right? It's the millions of buildings statewide. So what does BEPS do? BEPS is a requirement that buildings that are 35,000 square feet and larger must meet specific energy performance standards, including net zero direct emissions by 2040. We're in the process of developing those regulations. We shared a draft regulation for public comment a couple of months ago. We're reviewing those public comments now. The regulation must include, according to the law, energy use intensity targets and net direct greenhouse gas emission targets. Based on the draft targets that we published, around 30% of covered buildings already meet the draft 2040 energy use intensity targets, and a different 30% of covered buildings already meet the draft 2040 net zero direct emissions targets. But what the analysis that the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is looking at, it also indicates that there are very few, if any, buildings that today, right now, meet both of those targets. So in other words, for almost every one of the covered buildings, over the next 17 years, there would need to be some improvement in either overall energy efficiency or and or decarbonizing their building energy systems. And then finally, for my part, before I hand it over to our partners to talk about some of the existing federal and state programs, wanted to give you kind of a lay of the land on where we are right now. So tomorrow, the University of Maryland will release something called Maryland's Climate Pathway. This is a report that lays out conceptual policies that are needed based on the analysis conducted by the scientists at the university on what the state would need to do to achieve its goal of reducing statewide greenhouse gas emissions 60% by 2031. Some of you have been participating in the Maryland Climate Commission's mitigation working group meetings over the last few months, and if you have been paying attention to those meetings, or if you're online and you want to go to the mitigation working group website right now, really all of the information about what's in this pathway report has already been presented to the public in that mitigation working group meeting. So no big surprises if you're already tied into that process, and I know a number of you are. MDE will be collecting public input on the conceptual policies that are called for in that pathway report over the next few months. July through September, we'll be doing some public listening sessions. Some of the new building sector policies that are under consideration are those that the Climate Commission has already recommended, including modifying in power to allow beneficial electrification. There were a couple of bills that would have nearly done that in the last session that may come back in the next legislative session. Adopting zero emission standards for space and water heating equipment. This is basically similar to our vehicle emission standards. The concept is requiring manufacturers of heating equipment to sell more and more zero emission heating equipment, similar to what we do to require manufacturers to offer more and more zero emission vehicles to Marylanders. And then clean heat standards conceptually is like a renewable portfolio standard, where we set requirements that say that the power sector needs to deploy more and more renewable and clean technologies. A clean heat standard essentially says in the thermal energy sector, there need to be more and more clean heat technologies, which can be heat pumps that can be improving weatherization and insulation in homes. There are a number of things that could be done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the objective of a clean heat standard. Vermont is in the process of developing their regulations for this right now. And then finally, the state's greenhouse gas reduction plan is due at the end of this year. So the state needs to determine, and will do so with input from the public, with input from this task force over the next few months, what are the new specific policies that the state will implement urgently to achieve its 2031 goal, right? And the analysis that the university is doing that you'll see in the pathway report that'll come out tomorrow morning shows that our current policies are already quite strong. We are on a path to achieve about a 51% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2031. We're leading the nation in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And yet we need to do a little bit more to achieve the 60% reduction there are some new conceptual policies that are called for in that report, and we look forward to receiving your input on those. Are there any questions about anything that I just covered before I turn things over to Jamal Lewis from Rewiring America to talk about federal programs? Yeah.
Hi, Mark, just a minor question. You said you're going to collect public input. Are you going to ask for written comments as well, or is it kind of listening to it?
It's both. So we're going to be doing, we're going to go around the state and host some listening sessions. There'll also be some online sessions that we're tentatively scheduling for September. We'll also be inviting written comments. As soon as this is published, people will have the opportunity to email us and share their filtered or unfiltered thoughts on the contents of that university report. Yeah, sure. Okay, well, seeing no other comments, can I turn things over to Jamal? And do you want me to drive your slides? Or actually, it might be handy for the mic over there. Yeah, why don't you take this seat? Slide over. You can drive. Yeah. Okay. Use this. Oh, you might actually. Yeah, I don't know if the arrows are working, but clicking that little thing switches.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamal Lewis. I'm with Rewiring America again. I'm going to be talking about incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act. I did some heavy work on implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act before I switched roles. Now I'm focused on state and local policy in the Mid-Atlantic region, Maryland included. So I'm excited to be here and excited to talk with you all. I'm going to be going through this pretty quickly. There's a lot of details in all of these incentives that I won't go into, but I'm happy to take questions either directly after or offline. Great, so we'll get into it. So the Inflation Reduction Act was a bill that passed last year and provides billions of dollars of incentives. I've sort of split up this presentation in a few buckets. We're going to talk about tax incentives first. And this is, for the folks in the room, very small. But on the left, you see the 25C residential energy efficiency tax credit. The important thing to know here is that they are consumer tax credits for things like purchasing and installing heat pumps. So any one of us as consumers can go out and purchase a heat pump and then submit to get a tax credit in sort of the following tax season. There's a maximum of $2,000 that you can get for the heat pump, which is an efficient electric version of a heating system. And the column on the right is the 25D residential clean energy tax credit, and that is for qualifying renewable energy sources, so rooftop solar, geothermal, and battery storage. The 25D tax credit, which is on the right, is a 30% uncapped tax credit. So it's 30% of the total cost. On the left, again, it's 30% up to $2,000 for heat pumps. There's some other sub credits as well. Again, these are consumer-based tax credits, and I'm just going to keep on moving. There are two main commercial tax credits, and when I say commercial, I'm meaning that could be claimed there are some single family that could be claimed, especially in this 45L, but largely they're for developers. So the 45L tax credit is intended to incentivize investments in meeting energy efficiency standards, namely the Energy Star and the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Homes program. There are the incentive amounts that I'm sure folks on the computer can see better than folks here in the room, but I think these slides are available, so you all should be able to see that, and I'm happy to ask questions. That's the 45L tax credit. The second tax credit, there's a typo there, but it's 179D, and this is a tax deduction for commercial buildings, and this is a incentive for commercial buildings to install and to improve the energy efficiency of their building. That includes building envelope, HVAC measures, and lighting. This is an incentive based on square footage. based on energy use intensity. So the architects in the room, I'm sure you understand that. But yeah, the important thing about these tax credits is that they are unlimited. So the impact of these tax credits scales up the more people that claim them here in Maryland. The 48E commercial tax credit is a bonus credit adder for solar and wind installed in 4 categories representing disadvantaged and low-income communities. This is effectively a bonus credit for meeting and providing additional benefits in terms of solar and wind to the 4 categories listed, which I won't go into too much detail, but there's a tribal allocation, there's a affordable housing allocation, there's allocations for being located in a low-income community, and there's allocations specifically for projects that would pass on more than 50% of the benefits to renters and low-income residents. So those are the tax incentives. There are a lot more non-tax incentives that I'll get into. The rebates, a lot of you probably have heard about these rebates. There's a electrification rebate. I've listed the dollar amount that Maryland's going to be getting, and these are consumer rebates. So they're intended to support the everyday consumer as they're switching and replacing old appliances. So that includes heating systems, includes water heating, stoves. So as you're replacing old appliances, you're able to get a rebate if you qualify, if your income qualifies to leverage that electrification rebate. There's also an efficiency rebate, which is effectively an incentive to improve the energy efficiency of your home. That includes sort of every imaginable measure that would improve the energy efficiency of your home. These are not unlimited. There's a certain amount of money that Maryland's getting that it can use to further the electrification transition here. These are just we did some projections, which I won't go into too deep on. There are some other buildings related incentives as well. This is the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. It's a affordable housing retrofit program. It is a HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development administered program. There are 3 categories, which again, I won't go into too great of detail, but there's the Elements sub-program, there's the Leading Edge, and then there's the Comprehensive. And the intent behind the 3 programs is to meet privately owned affordable housing developers where they are. There are some that want to go big. There are some that may want to do sort of minor changes. And so those 3 programs are intended to be flexible enough to meet affordable housing developers where they are. The state of Maryland doesn't have much of a role here. This will really be between developers and HUD, but the state of Maryland can definitely play a role in encouraging all affordable housing developers in the state to apply for this opportunity. Building codes, there is a pot of money at the Department of Energy for building codes, $1 billion total. The allocation has not been broken down. I'm not sure if it's going to be a competitive allocation or if Maryland's going to get a certain amount. But this program is intended to help states and local governments both design building codes that will move the market in the state or locality, as well as enforce those building codes. So Maryland will have access to portions of that funding also. And then we've got the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a really complicated program. The important thing to know here is that there's starting on the right, there's a Solar for All, which is intended to help install residential solar. And then the 2 sort of top left buckets are really intended to promote greenhouse gas reduction measures of all types, of all sectors. So in Maryland, that could, the way that the average consumer will interact with these programs will be through a local community development financing institution or the Maryland Clean Energy Center, where they will gain access to financing that will help them improve the quality of their home, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and improve the efficiency.
Fun fact,
Yeah.
Maryland was the first state to submit all of its required application materials to get our greenhouse gas reduction fund allocation. So go.
Nice. And so these are just the different buckets which you are free to peruse as you see fit. I also understand that the climate pollution reduction grant that Maryland was the first to submit its notice of intent. So kudos to Maryland.
We're greedy.
Yeah, I love it. So these are just broad pollution reduction funding that could be used for buildings if Maryland chooses to, to direct them. So the climate pollution reduction grants, which will be housed in the Maryland Department of Environment, there is an allocation for Maryland that is Maryland is required to propose a plan, and then we'll have the opportunity to submit a portion of that plan for implementation. So if Maryland chooses to use that on buildings, it could do that. So there's a tremendous opportunity there. The Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant in the middle is not a state run. That is for intended to be for nonprofits and other sort of like local government partnerships. And so the state of Maryland, if it really wants to be greedy, can encourage all of the nonprofits or nonprofit partners to make sure that they're applying for that and using that to decarbonize buildings. And then there's a section for schools. So I know that schools are a big thing, are important in the lives of children. So wanting to make sure that those school buildings are as healthy and emit the least amount of pollution as possible. So there's a little pot of money there directed to schools. So that is the suite of programs that I am talking about. And I think we'll get over to Eric, who's going to come over here and talk to you a little bit about Maryland state programs.
That is a hard act to follow. I wish I had some nice flow charts and some things like that, but well, you are proud. Get everything to drive right here, but one things I wanted to help baseline where we are in terms of state programs. So quick introduction, Eric Kaufman. I'm the Division Director of Energy Programs for the Maryland Energy Administration. And we work across the state and with partners to roll out resources, other things to reduce energy consumption, drive clean energy, drive affordability, as well with the lens towards equity. And maybe.
Yeah.
Here, you want this?
Clicking. I don't know. Oh, well, if that drives it, that works. But if you click the little arrow next to 30, yeah.
There we go. So, apologies. So, quick background. Maryland Energy Administration, New York, we manage the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. For the administrator of the fund, we deploy on any given year between $80 and $100 million for programs. Those programs comprise grants, rebates, loans, technical assistance, and as well as education efforts across the state. The Strategic Energy Investment Fund, otherwise affectionately known as the SEIF, is funded primarily from proceeds from the sale of regional greenhouse gas allowance auctions, as well as renewable energy credits from alternative compliance fee payments, for example, for where if we don't meet the renewable, as a state, we don't meet the renewable portfolio standards, the suppliers pay into that, the alternative compliance payment, which then goes to deploy for programs. One concept that we spend a lot of our time wrestling with is each individual funding source has a number of statutory provisions that guide us, and in some cases dictate how we spend resources. So, for example, some funds can only be used for low to moderate income. Some funds can only be used in certain ways. Energy efficiency funds, which are probably one of the most relevant ones to this conversation, can only be used for cost-effective improvements. So as we sort of navigate the programs that are deployed on an annual basis, we're balancing all this to be able to get those programs out so they can provide the benefits to Maryland. Our program fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. So we are actually right between program years, wrapping up 23, literally tomorrow, and gearing up for 24. So just sort of the macro view is, so our programs generally fall into 5 primary areas. Clean energy and resiliency, energy efficiency in buildings, clean transportation, partnerships, and innovation in diversity, equity, and inclusivity, as well as wind and water. And then under each of those areas, we have a number of programs. So for example, this last year, over $19 billion of funds was deployed to community-based organizations delivering energy efficiency to low to moderate income Marylanders. We also provide grants for commercial, industrial, and agricultural energy efficiency improvements. We're seeing a lot more multifamily year over year. We're seeing a lot more condominiums come to us wanting resources to help us reduce their energy consumption and improve their buildings. Public school decarbonization was a pilot for us. One of the areas we're very, very keenly focused is working with school districts, because they provide a great venue for educating as well as providing direct community benefits. So in the previous year, we had provided a program where we provide energy management funds to help them benchmark their energy use. Many of the same things that commercial building owners will be doing under the BEPS. We provide funds to help them benchmark their energy use and develop plans for long-range plans for net zero schools. In the coming year, we're going to do, in this coming year, starting here very shortly, we're going to be deploying resources to also help them embed net zero into their schools, as well as to expand solar, particularly for those schools in low disadvantaged and overburdened communities. We provide loans. Our Jane Lawton loan program provides energy efficiency loans at a very favorable rates. We provide resources under that program to state agencies, as well as the private sector as a whole. That's a growing program, especially with the current trajectory and interest rates as a whole. We also are responsible for appliance standards, which is our sole regulatory element with regards to energy efficient appliances. The ones that are specifically not federally preempted. And then as Jamal,
Where are the appliances? Which column?
they would fall under energy efficiency in buildings.
Okay.
Madam Secretary.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
And then as Jamal mentioned, we are also deploying electrification funds. Oh, no worries. So we're also
Just ignore it. Keep going. Let's see if you can ignore it.
I can hear myself. This would be interesting.
I know.
We're also deploying a whole $180 million of federal funds. 136 million of that is the 2 big programs that Jamal mentioned, which is electrification, home electrification, as well as the homes program for energy efficiency. Those are going to be some of the biggest programs we've ever deployed, but are also a tremendous opportunity to transform the market for heat pumps electrification. Clean energy programs we offer similar. We offer a whole array of clean energy and resiliency programs. Many of those we try and bring everyone 2-part solutions where they can look at energy efficiency plus clean energy. And just to give you an idea, we also have clean transportation. We have a lot of partnership programs. We have an open innovation framework for ideas that we never thought of, or that people can propose ideas to us. And then we also have offshore wind. But one of the things to give you a sense of transaction volume, we provide over 6,000 rebates a year for solar geothermal projects. And then over 200 grants, agreements, loans, and memoranda of understanding for other projects as well. So we're deploying this package year over year to benefit the state of Maryland. Obviously, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and there's a lot of potential opportunities there for the task force. The other element here in terms of macro priorities, in terms of criteria, we're looking at our package of programs every year in the context of greenhouse gas reductions, and we're also looking at the cost of achieving those greenhouse gas reductions. So we're starting to think through things like how the EPA's social cost of carbon fits into our program designs, the administration of the CEF, and we also are focusing on schools, as I mentioned, as well as solar canopies as an opportunity to make double use of parking lots and the existing gray space for clean energy development. And the mouse is just there. We go. Okay. Jamal covered some of this, but just sort of give you the macro on federal funds. We've talked about the homes program. We talked about electrification. You know, there's going to be a lot of partnership development with our friends at Department of Housing, Community Development, and others on those programs. The Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund is another formula fund to the state of $1.6 million. I think it's $1.6 million and change. And we are partnering with the Department of Housing and Community Development. We've applied for those funds. They haven't been awarded yet. Their formula, we're waiting for word from DOE. But that's going to give an opportunity to focus on affordable housing and multifamily with DHCD. And grid resiliency, you know, helps enable building energy performance. So we also have applied for funds that are formula for funds to bolster the grid, and those funds are targeted right now towards greenhouse gas reductions, reducing some of the equity challenges of frontline communities, as well as enabling broader deployment of clean energy.
I'm sorry, when you say you applied for funds, so you don't have funding now in grid resiliency yet?
We have not received the award yet. Those are formula funds to the state, so we will get it.
Formula. So as long as we meet the requirements of the grant, it's not a competitive program.
Oh.
It's formula. So all the states that meet the criteria will get it.
Perfect.
And so once we get the award, we can begin the process of appropriations and then program development.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Empower Maryland, as mentioned, it's not want to talk broader than MEA. A significant amount of the resources going into building energy efficiency improvements comes from the Empower Maryland program. You know, there's programs, just for a quick recap, you know, offer incentives for residential, commercial, building, and business energy efficiency, and they're active in BG&E, Delmarva, Pepco, Potomac Edison, SMECO, the cooperative, as well as Washington Gas. Under Empower, and DHCD is better versed than I ever will be in these two programs, is Maryland Limited Income Program, as well as the Multifamily Energy Efficiency and a Housing Affordability Program. Mouse is,
Yeah, well, like a little.
Like that.
it's like, they want to go the opposite way. Some other opportunities that the task force may want to consider as they think about the total available resources to help achieve these goals. Maryland has 19 counties that have implemented property assessed clean energy. And what that does is it allows a project to be financed and then the repayment to tie to the property tax bill. So it helps with what's called a split incentive, where the entity it's occupying, if it's leased, may not be one that owns it, allows it to sort of bring that together. Gives a tremendous opportunity for large capital injections to commercial buildings. That is commercial buildings and only in Maryland. Local government energy conservation tax credits. There is state enabling legislation, and many local governments have taken advantage of that in the residential and sometimes the commercial sector to introduce tax credit programs to essentially provide incentives for energy conservation improvements, as well as in many cases renewable energy improvements or green buildings in their communities. Our colleagues at the Maryland Clean Energy Center have the Maryland Clean Energy Advantage Program, which provides loans for residential energy efficiency improvements, as well as the Maryland Clean Energy Capital Program. And then there are a number of local government green banks and financing authorities that have emerged. You've got one in Montgomery County, the Montgomery County Green Bank. There is a resiliency authority now in Anne Arundel, and there are others forming up across the state, seeking to leverage private capital and other sources to be able to deliver energy efficiency, clean energy, and resiliency benefits. And that's it. Questions? And of course, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions for Eric and actually for Jamal as well? I don't think that we paused to see if you had any questions for either of them, federal or state.
And I'll just note for people in the room, I know some of these slides, some of the text was hard to read. We will be circulating these and posting these so you can get a copy of them later.
Some of us may have been working in PowerPoint and others in Google and bringing it all together.
maybe we'll make sure we have, maybe copies. Maybe so people have it in front of them. I just have a general question. When we talk, and that's for both of you, when we talk about all of the funding mechanisms, and you made a point about statutory requirements, which some people in public call limitations. It's just hard to get to the money, right? And I've heard that a lot just in the 5 months I've been here. But when we don't have to answer this question today, but just what I was thinking, there's millions, billions of money that's available. And a lot of these, I believe, both of you, are reserved for homeowners, right? Not industry.
I got my answer. Do you want to go first? Or?
There are a lot for industry. What do you mean by industry?
Well, we're talking about this whole building transition, right? So large buildings that we're talking about, building owners, right? And we're talking about transforming the building industry. Some, I'm assuming, would be apartments, obviously, and homeowners. But, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's the industry who needs the money the most.
Referring to like commercial buildings?
Correct.
There are, yeah, I think you're
And the
right.
well, you're calling the apartments commercial buildings?
I wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
There are a significant portion are for residences. The one deduction that I mentioned, which is the 179D for energy efficiency improvements, is for commercial buildings, and that one is a square footage deduction. So that can turn into a lot of money too. But I think you're largely right that the commercial sector has less.
I think I'm bringing it up to say, well, as we are thinking about these things, and you can help me out, Ian, when we're pitching and selling and analyzing, how do we do this? It's about money that's available for the larger industry, right? The commercial, I guess the building owners. So I'm just thinking, when we're thinking about how do we do this, that funding that's directed to the people who need it most, not just the homeowners, where appliances and things like that. And well, I think you did say some of the funding is for like air conditioner units, to convert those over as well. But I'm just thinking in my mind, and I could be wrong, that a lot of the funding we need to think about as we're thinking about this whole transition is for the higher commercial as well.
There is a little bit of a mix.
Okay.
In that, and there are nuances to each layer, but some of the federal funding coming in can be used for multifamily as well as single family residents, so we can address some of those multifamily projects. And then in terms of the programs MEA deploys, we have commercial programs as well as residential programs. Our loan programs are targeted towards commercial. Our commercial industrial grants have been for industry as well as commercial buildings. And we also are.
Do you know what percentage that's devoted to the commercial, the large buildings, 35,000 plus the big, even though you started off, Mark, saying this is for all buildings, right? But it's still a portion of where we're targeting are the, am I correct? The large building.
Yeah, I think as we just saw, there are really exceptional federal and state programs that exist to decarbonize really every type of building that we have. Although I think what I've heard from many, and I assume probably a lot of our experts in the room would agree, there's not perhaps enough funding behind each of those programs to achieve the total building sector transition that we're talking about achieving in the time that we have to achieve it to achieve Maryland's goals.
Right.
So we have, you know, so it could be that programmatically, a lot of it's there already. And some of the focus of the task force might say, it seems that we have some very successful programs that are just underfunded to do the things that we need to do. That's one potential outcome of the task force.
When I add that, one of the programs we offer pump millions of dollars into commercial buildings. One of the things we have a challenge is getting commercial buildings to come to us to take advantage of those programs. Is often some of the issues they'll raise is that the needs they have, they essentially are running out of light bulbs to replace at the macro. That sort of the rapid return on investment, energy efficiency improvements they've typically done, they're running out because they've already done them. Now they're coming to us for things like large heating and cooling system replacements, big central plant type projects, which are very large amounts of capital, and also they chafe a little bit at definitions like cost effectiveness, because they're really capital investments that need additional boost. So we'll usually focus on trying to cover some of the incremental costs, those improvements over the conventional, but the need is huge. And there's also federal programs through the DOE Loan Program Office that are offering billions of dollars of capital nationwide that want to do these projects, but get commercial building owners comfortable with those and open to accepting that financing and be able to fund what away with those.
Yeah, I have two other points, which is the greenhouse gas reduction fund is a broad pot of money that can be used for effectively any sector in the industry, including buildings of all types. And so the way that will, I suspect, manifest will be, again, like the Maryland Clean Energy Center or the Montgomery County Green Bank will be able to offer more of their like commercial property assessed clean energy programs, commercial PACE, which are programs that are designed to improve efficiency. They'll be able to offer better and arguably more effective loan incentives that can be available and will be available, I suspect, for both commercial buildings, and then I suspect there will also be residential. But that is intended to leverage both public and private capital, and is also intended to be a revolving loan fund. So that can, I think, sort of carry a large portion of the need. The second sector that I think needs additional attention is the low-income housing sector, which will need a significant amount of money to complete and achieve hopefully the 100% retrofits by 2030, but they'll just need a lot of attention.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I see a comment on the chat. One thing I would also just note for the record, I really appreciate you bringing up the 179D, and it's worth noting two other sectors that are really worth thinking about is nonprofits and other places that don't have tax liability and so can't take advantage of tax incentives, and also often may not have the credit or the capital to take advantage of some of the loan programs. But I see a question. Someone raised their hand online.
Yeah, this is Nick Silbergeld at HASI, and the risk of sounding a little self-serving as a financier, I'd also like to make the point that there is private commercial capital that is able to provide a lot of the financing for a lot of these capital improvements that need to happen. And so I'd suggest that a lot of the thinking should be that this government money, both state and federal, should be thought of as leveraging the private capital, which to an extent is unlimited. So that money can be multiplied out rather than thought of as a very finite resource. So a lot of the projects and a lot of the things that have already been discussed that the programs are targeted towards, these are things that private capital is already financing, but with additional leverage of public sector funding could finance either a lot more of or get at some of the sectors such as low-income housing, nonprofit organizations and buildings that they occupy that currently have trouble accessing a lot of that capital.
Nick, great comment, and I anticipated a hand from Kathy Magruder, and sure enough, go ahead, Kathy.
You read my mind, Mark. Thank you. Let me just say that I'm quite in tune with what Nick has mentioned. The other sector, the other piece of the puzzle with PACE that I think we need to be very cognizant of is that the PACE financing marketplace, the private investors are really comfortable in a sweet spot of projects below $500,000 or above $500,000. And so many of the small business, low to moderate income businesses are not going to be able to hit that sweet spot for private sector. So I think that our intention is for these federal resources to be targeted at serving that audience through the Green Bank entity.
One thing also that we run into a lot is you've got the energy project and then you've got everything else that needs to be done to the building and the timing of everything else. And that can be substantial, particularly in some of the communities that haven't had the investment that's needed. We run into a lot with low income energy improvements where the home just needs more than the program can deliver. And to be able to get to the retrofit, the savings, you've got to be able to bring the home or the building up to, essentially up to code.
Are there other questions and comments?
Kathy, were you raising your hand again?
I think
I don't think so.
I think she spoke.
And just to go back to what the
Yes.
secretary,
Okay, go ahead, Kathy. And then
I was going to ask if Eric Kaufman could talk a little bit about the Climate Transition and Energy Hub, and how will that work?
So Climate Solutions Now Act created a position within MEA to be able to provide a lot of the, in many ways, a lot of the hand holding and outreach that's needed to be able to help building owners move forward. That's recently, was in this year's budget, what's called a PIN process, which is a position. And we're in the process of defining that now. But I think in terms of the task force's feedback, it's going to be vital to defining and fleshing out that position.
Yeah, and just to elaborate, I think it's envisioned that it will be a position that will help provide technical assistance to building owners who are trying to decarbonize. It can be a hub to sort of centralize some of that information. Because obviously, if we just what we heard just now from Jamal and Eric, it's a tremendous number of programs. People they might know a little slice of one or two or three. They're not going to have the whole package. So I think we are hoping that the hub can sort of centralize some of that information, provide that technical expertise to help, whether it's public or private building owners, large or even small, to figure out what the best path is to finance the decarbonization. So I think that's going to be important. Obviously, that's only starting. The funding just only for that position just begins in July, and we'll be actively recruiting for that position.
And I'd even add, we have a lot of experience in this area. We do something similar with manufacturing now at the Regional Manufacturing Institute of Maryland, the other RMI, as well as the Maryland Extension Partnership, and where we've provided them funding to work with manufacturers to do that assistance, help them sort of define the business case for the improvements, and then help them access not only our funds, but other funds as well. So, it's something that's been very successful for us. I think they've identified something where in the order of 45 million kilowatt hours of energy savings in the manufacturing sector. So sort of that kind of example to help building owners will be essential to moving forward.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Yeah.
so and this is data that I'm wondering if it would be useful for us as we move forward. You were bringing up residential and commercial, and realizing that many of us are interested in this because we know we've got a bunch of covered buildings, so we've got to address FABs, but realizing that we also, as in the case of Oldham County, we have roughly 200 buildings. 24 of them fall under FABs. Everything else doesn't, but we still worry about it. We only have to deal with commercial buildings. We don't have any residential for our, that we own. Would it be helpful to kind of see what data is out there as to where is the greenhouse gas production for residential versus commercial, and within commercial, multifamily versus, because there's going to be plenty of small commercial buildings. What is their actual greenhouse gas load? And so where does the money then potentially need to be targeted most, where there's the most emissions, as well as the greatest opportunity for reducing this?
Sure. Yeah. And on one hand, we can absolutely provide that data, and the high level numbers here, we've got about 5 million metric tons of direct building emissions from residential buildings annually, and another roughly 5 million tons from the commercial buildings, direct emissions annually. That doesn't include all of the electric sector emissions, right? We can provide that, though the requirements that we're under to reduce greenhouse gas emissions means everything is on the table. The entire economy, we've got to figure out how to, decarbonize. So that's why we're talking about the building sector so broadly in this case.
And I think that's important to think about too. Buildings that are covered by BEPS, those building owners probably a lot don't know it yet, but they probably will soon. They have a pretty big incentive to find out about these programs and start that process. But all the rest of the buildings in the state, including the commercial buildings that are under that threshold or exempt for some reason, you know, we're going to have to reach out to them and figure out how to, you know, and what's going to make it happen. And, you know, that's one of the things that we have to think about here. What kind of incentives, how do we package them? You know, we heard about all these federal programs, but the state has some discretion in sort of how we figure out how to package and slice them. We talked about, you know, loan and programs and leveraging. So I think there is a lot of flexibility, but that also means a lot of responsibility to figure out how to target it to get the most bang for the buck in emissions, and also hopefully value for building owners.
See another hand online, though I'm afraid I can't read the name. Michael?
Oh, it looks like
the
you might
individual's
be
muted.
Muted, Michael.
Okay, all right. Now can you hear me? Sorry about that. Thank you for taking my question. So far, everything I've heard is about, I believe, operational carbon, and I'm not sure if anyone is considering embodied carbon. But given that we have a relatively short time frame before the climate change tipping point, all the concrete and steel and glass buildings going up have an enormous immediate embodied carbon footprint that could make a lot of this long-term operational stuff seem rather insignificant. And so I'm just wondering if the commission is paying attention to that. We've done a bunch of embodied versus operational carbon studies. We'd be happy to share. We're a small consulting firm. Go ahead. I do have another question, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, to quickly address that one, yes, very much a focus for us. We do have some buy clean policies in Maryland that are working to address some of the embodied carbon issues. Do tune in to some of the mitigation working group meetings at the state's climate commission because they dive into some of that. No, to address your question specifically, the scope of this task force is really looking at decarbonizing the operational emissions, right? It's looking at providing incentives to replace some of the fuel burning equipment that's in buildings and otherwise improve the efficiency of the building. So the upstream emissions in some ways are more handled by MDE in our policy considerations and the state's climate commission discussions more so than this task force.
The place where there's an intersection is making sure that our policies and programs continue to incentivize buildings that are facing the standards and trying to do things to take action to improve the existing building as opposed to tearing it down and replacing it. That's sort of the intersection point. If you have a second, we are running.
Yeah, that's sort of, both of those comments segue into my other question. I'll have to find a meeting to go to about embodied energy as well. In my experience, we do large and small building retrofits, affordable housing, apartments, etc., and also single family homes. In our experience, unless you're an organization with capital, which a multifamily developer may have, if you're a single family homeowner or a small building owner, the amounts are kind of too small to tip the scales. So I think someone mentioned this before, that we're still sort of in the gravitational orbit of the concept of low-hanging fruit, and we're running out of the light bulbs to replace, and the light bulbs being changed out was never enough to avoid climate change. So we need to be more aggressive. Now, the problem is that then if you try to do a cost effectiveness analysis on that, you're up against a baseline of cheap fracked oil as a fuel for your electricity. So it's hard with a artificially low cost of energy that excludes all the pollution impacts, etc., to then invest in better strategies for, say, a single family house. So our single family homeowners really are having a harder time taking the leap. So the whole cost effectiveness notion is kind of a one-sided fiction if you don't include what someone earlier referred to as the social cost of carbon. So if this EPA cost of carbon could be applied somehow to the cost benefit formula and apply some market signal so that it is more expensive to do the bad thing, that could be as powerful as telling people you're going to give them a couple $1,000s for something that might cost them $28,000.
We're with you. Thank you for that comment.
Any other comments from maybe some folks in the room before we move on to the next agenda item?
Thank you.
I want to thank Eric and Jamal for their excellent presentations and a good discussion.
My pleasure.
All right, so we're now going to talk a little bit about the work plan for the task force and get some feedback from folks on the task force about that work plan and where it sits. Mark, you want to?
Yeah, I'll just set this up with a high level overview, and also if it might feel natural to also talk about the work plan as it relates to our idea about creating some subgroups that are kind of building stuff. So we can jump around between this slide and the next one, but just at a high level, December is going to be here before we know it. It doesn't feel like it given the temperatures outside. But when we look ahead at the frequency of this task force meeting and the task ahead, this is a very accelerated timeline, right? So we have the task force kickoff today. We have our next meeting scheduled in about a month from now, July 27th. And we're trying to really load that meeting with information for you to better understand, well, what's the actual cost of decarbonizing Maryland's buildings, right? And we will hope to have ready for you by that meeting analysis, very detailed analysis from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab about the cost of achieving the BEPS standards for the BEPS covered buildings. And then we also will have some information about, okay, well, what about all the other buildings? So what about small commercial? What about typical residential, right? That's not covered by BEPS. Fortunately, we're building on many years of many great organizations, including some studies that we have funded directly on these topics. So we hope to present some of that information to you, and all of the content that we, poured on you about federal and state programs. We don't expect you to remember and memorize any of that. The idea is that we have partners here so that when you say, it really seems that what we need is this, then we'll have the right people in the room to say, well, actually, this and that address what you're talking about, but maybe only covering 40% of the cost need. So maybe it's about how do you add additional funding to it. Tune in on July 27th. That one's probably going to be action-packed. And then beyond that, it's really, the agenda really opens up. And what we try to do is start folding in more and more information from the subgroups. And actually, it might just be helpful to tell you what we're thinking of in terms of the subgroups. And then we can come back to the work plan.
I can talk through that.
Yeah, please do.
Unless you want to.
No, go ahead.
Cooperation. So the reason we're creating these subgroups is we found, and I've definitely seen in my own work in other jurisdictions, people want to get deep in the issue, especially with specific sector. And there's a great amount of experts in this room, and there's a great amount of other experts who would want to get their voices onto the subgroups. Are subgroups of this task force, and that we're looking for task force members to, as they're interested, be part of them. We are ideally, I think, looking for one subgroup, one task force member to sort of act as a co-chair for each of those groups. We might wait till next meeting to appoint those, since we are still waiting on some of the members of this task force. But they'll also be open to members of the public to be included in, other members of the public to be included in these subgroups as well. There'll be 4 main subgroups. The first is large buildings covered by BEPS, which is to say commercial and multifamily buildings, 35,000 square feet and larger. And then the second, and that is obviously a lot of focus. And I think it's worth reminding folks that the charge of this task force and the subgroups is, again, thinking about what are the incentives, what are the programs, what's needed to make this program successful. MDE is doing a separate process around the actual regulations for the BEPS, and there were public comments on that last month, and there'll be other sets of public comments in the future. So this subgroup is, again, around what resources are needed to allow buildings to meet the BEPS, not what does the BEPS look like. I just think it's an important distinction there. The second subgroup is small commercial and institutional buildings, also potentially industrial buildings, other sectors that are not residential, that are not covered by BEPS. So this would be commercial and multifamily, commercial buildings, not multifamily, commercial buildings smaller than 35,000 square feet, K through 12 schools, which are not included in the BEPS of any size, so the way the law is written. Industrial sector buildings might be included here too, to some extent, agricultural buildings, and so forth. The third group is market rate housing not covered by BEPS, so single family homes and small multifamily buildings that are smaller than 35,000 square feet. I expect the subgroup will end up largely talking about single family homes, so I think it's worth noting that it does in fact also include market rate multifamily smaller than 35,000, and put it not to forget about that group. And the fourth will be limited income housing, both covered and not covered by BEPS. So this is subsidized and also naturally occurring affordable housing. And the reason we've structured this one as also including building covered by BEPS, which, yes, acknowledging does create some overlap with the first subgroup, that's intentional. What we know is that the financial constraints in the affordable housing sector, especially the subsidized covenanted capital A affordable housing sector, are very significant and severe and constraining. The kinds of funding resources available for them are different. The funding is, and when other jurisdictions have tried to sort of cover that within just a general discussion, those voices get drowned out potentially, and they do deserve attention. So we definitely want to have a group focused on that specifically. So these will be the four subgroups. We're aiming to try to figure out IMT will be running each and facilitating the subgroups, myself and my colleague Cliff Majerzik, who some of you may know and is on vacation in Italy right now. So couldn't be here. I hope he's on vacation in Italy. I'm not checking his email. We're listening to this on the phone. I don't see him. I wouldn't put it past him. Anyway, so we're looking to find folks to help sort of facilitate, co-chair those with us, and then we'll be trying to kick those off over the summer and bringing some of the data that we talked about that we'll be discussing in general in September back to the subgroups in a bit more detail. Do we want to have questions on the scoping of those, or would it be helpful for folks to just go back and then return to the question of the timeline?
Marshall, what should people do if they're interested in co-chairing or being a member of one?
Correct. A great question. This would be helpful if I was looking at my notes here. If people have questions on becoming a member of the subgroups, they can talk to me. They should email Cindy, who's right there. We'll make sure that email is circulated to everyone. If you don't have it, email Cindy if you'd like to be a member of a subgroup. If you would like to sort of co-chair a subgroup, email Cindy. If you know someone who you think would be a good person to be on a subgroup, email Cindy, and we'll pull that together. And they will be open participation again, so they'll benefit. We are looking for diverse perspectives, both building owners, but also especially in the multifamily, residents as well. So please do come. Mark has gone to the other side of the room.
Only because I can't read the screen.
I'm going to type in an email.
Oh, thank you. I thought I'd driven him away here. So yes, that's what people should do if they want to be. People on the phone, the email will be put there momentarily. And any other questions on the subgroups here? And again, the process I think with these subgroups is we want a lot of the discussion to occur in the subgroups. The subgroups will meet. The subgroups will bring recommendations back to the task force. The subgroups are not decision-making bodies in the sense in which they are making recommendations direct to the legislature or anything. All of that comes back to the task force. The task force vets it. The task force makes decisions on what goes forward. And there also may be ideas that come from task force members that don't come out of any subgroup at all, and that's okay as well.
So, and although I think there might be a tendency, right? Everybody, we want to decarbonize. I think we all probably share that goal. The question is trying to figure out how to accomplish it, understanding that there are, the state has limited resources. So we should be aware of that. We want to make recommendations, I think, that are cognizant of that will advance decarbonization in an affordable way, because otherwise we can make any recommendation we want, but if it's not going to be affordable for the state, it's not going to happen. So, we have to be realistic, pragmatic too.
Yeah, I really appreciate you raising that point and remembering when we talk next month about sort of what is the cost of this, remembering there's the cost and and in some sectors such as, low income single family homes, it's often the expectation that you're going to cover the full cost. But in many sectors, the goal of government action is to close the gap between what the private sector can finance and what's needed, not to make it free. And money is not, as you say, not infinite, right?
We can't deficit spend like the Feds.
Unfortunately, no. Though we can lobby the Fed to definitely spend more, I suppose. I don't know. That was a facetious comment. Can we go back to the timeline? I think it would help people understand sort of the role these subgroups will play. So again, we'll be meeting in July 27th to lay out this overall findings on the cost, and then again on August 24th to discuss new and emerging decarbonization programs and some of the initial findings from some of the analysis that initial analysis that technical partners like AECOM are doing. The goal is that the subgroups will kick off. The subgroup schedule is not listed here, but the goal is that the subgroups, in an ideal world, the subgroups would kick off immediately. And in reality, we need to recruit good people, and we ended summer holidays. So the goal is that the subgroups will kick off this summer and begin meeting, and will meet as few or as many times as they feel like they need to within the overall timeline, with the first draft subgroup recommendations coming back to the task force on September 28th, at the end of September. And then on October 12th, a second draft of subgroup recommendations. So that would be a question where either the subgroups have to meet again to discuss more details, or there was pushback or questions on the recommendations and more is needed there. And then on October 26th, the task force will meet this is again the proposal to endorse, modify, and reject subgroup recommendations. And that will then be when we begin drafting a report with the goal of delivering a first draft of the task force report for November 7th, which will be discussed and probably more decisions made at that point, and then finalizing it by the end of November for submission by December 1st. And then on December 7th, we have a scheduled meeting where we will celebrate, or we'll decide we have much more work to do and we'll decide to keep meeting. We can celebrate, but I think that the challenge needs to be met one way or the other. Mark, you have additional stuff you want to add here before we sort of open it up to the task force to get feedback on the proposed work plan?
I guess I'd only pick up where you were just leaving off, which is that we recognize that these are big questions in front of us in terms of the policies, the programs, the funding that should be available to achieve what is roughly maybe a 20-year transition of the building sector to be decarbonized on pace to meet Maryland's GHG reduction requirements. We don't assume that we're going to have all of that mapped out by November 21st, right? So it's entirely possible that what the task force might realize and decide on its own is that you want to forward, in order to achieve our legal requirement of having a report due by December 1st, perhaps this is going to be a report that addresses whatever recommendations we have at that point. But if you otherwise decide there's more conversation that's needed here, there's more work that the task force would like to do beyond December 1st, then we just want to start this process acknowledging this is a very tight timeline, very big topics, and we'll do what we can to get some recommendations together, if not your complete list of recommendations by December 1st.
Thanks for adding that, Mark. Yeah, recommendations can include more research needed, more task force discussion needed as well. What are folks, for the members of the task force who are here on the phone, any thoughts, questions on this sort of draft work plan and the subgroups that have been laid out, acknowledging the sort of statutory schedule constraints that we are working within? Yeah, please.
You mentioned that IMT will support and facilitate the subgroups. Does that
Correct.
include writing up the recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the recommendations of the good question. I mean, the recommendations of the subgroups they are approved, will become the report. So to the extent we are helping draft the report. We would also be helping draft the subgroup recommendations. I would think in some cases you may see someone coming to a subgroup meeting with a recommendation that is very technical and specific, and I might ask them to, if it's drawing on their own technical expertise, maybe provide some content there. But by and large, yes, we'd be supporting that as well.
And on the other end, oh yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Could you let us know how many subgroups there are and what the, I suppose, title would be of each subgroup when you send out the invitation to join? It's hard to keep all this in your head, so that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, there are 4 subgroups on the screen here, but we'll send it. We can circulate that as well. Large buildings covered by BEPS, small commercial institutional buildings not covered by BEPS, market rate housing not covered by BEPS, and low income, limited income housing of all sorts.
And the slides that we're all looking at, we didn't have the opportunity before this meeting to post them on MDE's website, but we will. There's a web page for this task force, and we'll be posting.
I have just been told all of them are already online.
Wow, my team's on it.
You have a great team.
I really, really do.
Mark,
Yep.
I was just wondering, you mentioned the Lawrence Berkeley study that we're going to talk about. Are we going to be able to get that in advance so we can kind of know if we have questions? Yes, please. Ask a bad question.
Well, I see our partner from LBNL on the line. My understanding, based on the email he sent me today, is that their analysis is in progress. So I don't know when we'll be able to share that, but I can say that our goal, if we have it, is to be able to share it in advance. Josh, anything you want to add to regard to that?
Yeah, sure. And apologies, a little bit tough to hear on the line, so don't have all the detail here, but we are actively working through it. It is a relatively unprecedented analysis in terms of the level of detail we're looking to provide here. Everything's very fresh off the presses with the work. And yeah, Mark mentioned the email we sent earlier today was clarifications we're getting on some of the assumptions that are driving like-for-like equipment replacement in base case scenarios for it. But yeah, we're very much over the next couple of weeks hoping to get something real substantive out for further iteration. And excited to share that with the task force as appropriate.
Thanks, Josh. And just so I know, is it challenging to hear all of the speakers? I'm wondering if we have a hardware issue to fix for the next meeting in here.
I think it is just people maybe further away from the mic. The system is filtering them out occasionally. But I can hear you all right, Mark.
Okay, we will work on the mic setup for the next meeting. Thank you.
Great.
If I could just follow up, I thought, Mark, you mentioned also that in addition to the Lawrence Berkeley study, there were other studies that were being pulled from?
Yes.
Mark, maybe repeat the question.
Yeah, thanks. So the question is, in addition to the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab study, are there additional studies that we plan to pull into this process to help inform the task force conversation around what is the cost to decarbonize the building sector? Rewiring America, RMI, and others have been doing studies at both the local and national level on these topics. They're among some of the presenters who we wanted to bring to you next for the next meeting to discuss some of that work. There have been some very specific studies done, for instance, looking at affordable housing in Maryland. I know you were part of that in partnership with RMI and others. So yeah, there's tremendous work that we can build on here.
Would it be possible just to give us a list of links so that if we're interested, we could be looking at some of this in advance?
Sure. Yeah, we've started compiling that. It's a long list. We've got a lot of wonderful studies. E3 has done a couple studies, both
There's a holiday
for
next
us.
week. I got nothing else.
Yeah, good. They did really good work for BGE as well. So yeah, we can send a long list so that you do not have to go through your holiday weekend being bored, for sure. Yeah, we're here for you.
And I would just add, we're working, one of the other technical partners, ACOM's doing some data aggregation, as Mark mentioned. So the goal is, especially for the subgroups, as questions emerge, modeling and analysis is not a calculator. It's not like you can provide answers in real time always. But the goal is, when there are key data and policy questions that are coming out of this group or out of subgroups, that we'll all be trying to answer them as best we can.
I think that we presented a draft work plan to you with our kind of thoughts on, of course, the statutory requirements for the task force as being our guiding principle, but also building on our own sort of knowledge as a technical group and subject matter experts on this. But definitely wanted to hear from you. What perception did you have walking into this task force, the type of things that you are expecting the task force to address, and are we addressing them in this draft work plan?
Sounds like it's perfect, Mark.
Nailed it. Okay.
Maybe those thoughts.
Yeah,
As we
that's
meet.
fine. Kathy. Oh, Kathy always has really hard things for me. Okay, what is it, Kathy? Kathy, you're muted.
The only thing that I think is maybe a gap is about outreach and education, and how a strategy for how we disseminate when we get to the point where it's, we got to move here. So I would like to just factor that into the thinking, maybe of the sub work groups, of how do you reach the audience that you are you're working on. How will we get the word to them? And that would dovetail, I think, with MEA's technical support agenda as well.
Kathy, when you say technical support, are you talking about the hub? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Or,
Right. So that, if we're working with the large buildings, what is the outreach and the support that we're gonna enable for that group? If we're working with LMI, how will we support and enable that group? I think that's just a piece I would like to add to the thinking, is how do we make sure that there's communication to those audiences and technical support for those audiences based on their needs.
This is Nick Sobergeld speaking. I would second Kathy's point. I think we often see that, and again, as I stated in my previous comments, the financing solution often exists in the market. A little bit of subsidy never hurts, but what doesn't always exist is funding and sort of the processes for educating the audience of how do you get to the point of being financeable to undertake the upgrades or the improvements or acquiring infrastructure that you're trying to do. I don't know how much flexibility exists in both the state and federal funding programs to apply funds for those purposes, but sort of what we generically call the pre-development work and the pre-development costs, I think often go overlooked and usually are the biggest barrier that we see to change happening.
I'm just going to thank Nick for clarifying what I wanted to say, but also add that there's an outreach aspect of this where, if we're working with low-income housing, do we have to have channel partners or agencies that are tasked with communicating to that audience, the content of which I think Nick has articulated well?
Kathy, a clarifying question for you, if I may. When you're talking about outreach and education in the context of all of this, I first thought we were talking about outreach and like education on sort of the work of the task force, but it sounds like you're talking more about sort of outreach and education to make sure people know about the incentives, know about the resources, that kind of thing, and have access to pre-development support, and less so in terms of sort of something that directly informs the task force's work in the short term,
Correct.
but maybe that, so correct, but more like that's just part of the scope to also be talked about in the task force is what's needed there, right?
And Nick's point about getting to fundable, right? Where are you when are you financeable? How do you get to financeable? It really is the how-to steps of, with PACE, for example, we have what you have to do to be financeable through PACE. And if we decide that we're going to use PACE to address the majority of a given audience in terms of financing, then we're going to want to think about how do we make sure they're aware of that resource, and how do you get to that point with your project where you can use that type of financing. And I think that's true for each audience and each, each situation, each financing tool that we're going to use.
I to that. When you're talking LMI constituents or home renters, homeowners, whatever, they often have not got the resources to help them apply for these things. So beyond knowing that this is available, there may also be a need for some agency, nonprofit agency, to step in and help them make application where it would be a good thing for them to do. Otherwise, an awful lot of this money is just going to be wasted, as it has been in the past. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I just add, depending on the community that you're trying to reach, to make sure that you've got a partner there that's trusted. Government's not always trusted. And so to make sure that you've got someone that can be working and speaking if needed.
Absolutely. Getting some good questions here on the scope of the task force work. Any other comments on that, or comments on the sort of the timeline that we've been presenting here? What's that? Oh, I do see one hand up online.
Hi, yeah, this is Cherie Seals, and I was just curious about the grouping of the subgroups. You have for schools, which we all know were not part of the CSNA, grouped as the part of the second task force or the second subgroup. And I was just wondering what made you think that small commercial and schools would be a good grouping. It would seem to me that schools would be a grouping on their own. I just wish you'd elaborate on that decision.
I mean, I think the thinking is, to be frank, I think we could look at having a fifth subgroup. I think there are resourcing challenges. I think the common factor for the second group was primarily buildings that were not subject to the building performance standards of sort of all sorts, which isn't just small commercial. It's also, there are types of other buildings that are not covered by BEPS, but if there's real benefit to sort of a breakout on institutional, that's a thing we could take back and consider. Thanks.
No problem.
So I see one hand up, and then if I could read it, it looked like Garrett Fitzgerald from Montgomery County maybe was offering to make a public comment as well. And I think that we're at the point.
We're at the point we should
Yeah.
move to that.
So let's do let's get public comment from Michael and then Garrett and then Madam Secretary. I think that we'll probably be able to wrap at that point. Go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to point out that, and to build on Kathy and Nick's point and the woman who's on the phone, in addition to communicating the incentives that are required, there's going to have to be a considerable effort in reaching out to and communicating with the builders of the world. We do not have, at the corporate level for larger buildings, if you set a standard and tell them they have to meet it, they have the management capacity to do that. But on the smaller scale, we do not have a workforce that can deliver on any of the recommendations we will most likely make. So another piece of the outreach and communications has to be communicating what can be accomplished and providing some sort of mechanism for workforce development, as they do in New York through the NYSERDA workforce development programs. So I know it's not specifically related to the task force recommendations, other than the fact that probably a task force recommendation does need to relate to workforce development to achieve these goals.
Thank you. And also, I know that some people have been using the chat to make comments and possibly ask questions. It's been challenging just here in the room to read them all, so we will be reviewing those afterwards and providing any feedback that's. And let's see, I think Garrett, were you next?
Thanks, Mark. This is Garrett Fitzgerald with Montgomery County. Appreciate the opportunity to make a comment to the group. Two quick things. One is I hope that you'll clarify whether folks who are not members, formal members of the task force, will be invited to participate in the subgroups as they're created, as we certainly might have interest in some of those topics, or how we might feed ideas into them, which leads to my second comment, which is I hope that the subgroup especially that's going to look at the market rate housing that's not covered by BEPS, and I think this could apply to other subgroups too. I hope that group will think a little bit about financing, including property tied or utility tied financing. One of the things that we're very concerned about, obviously there's a lot of incentive money out there now, there's more incentive money coming. We also, I think, know that incentive money alone, no matter how much you offer, is not enough to trigger the markets to make energy upgrades across the building stock at the scale that the Maryland pathway, climate pathway that we're all about to see, I think tomorrow, is likely to say is necessary. And part of the reason for that is a lot of folks who live in homes, whether they own the home or not, are really not sure exactly how long they're going to stay in that home. And when we talk about improvements that are cost effective, that would be cost effective and pay for themselves within 8 years or 10 years, which a lot of residential improvements do, there are a lot of people who are not confident they're going to stay in a home for 8 or 10 years and are not confident that they'll be able to recoup their investment when they sell the property. And there are a lot of people who don't have access to capital to make the improvements, even with the deep incentives that are offered. So one of the tools that we've seen in certain places in the country is a property tied or utility tied, like an on-bill financing program. I think that programs like that can be very effective if they're designed the right way, can mitigate risk for all parties involved, and can be very effective for enabling a much broader segment of the population to potentially undertake energy upgrades. And we ought to be exploring whether there's a viable program there that should be part of the suite of offerings here in Maryland. So I'll leave it at that, but would love to engage folks on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Garrett. If I was not clear, yes, the subgroups are intended to be open to members of the public beyond the task force. That is absolutely designed, so that's a good discussion for that subgroup. I know we've been hearing from some folks in the public on the call. I know there's a lot of folks from the public in this room. Mark, do we want to open it up at this point to those folks as well. We're running quite low on time here.
Yeah, we are, and I know that some people have commitments at 3. So I think one, we're going to send and post. We already have posted the slides. We hope to hear, and thank you for Cindy on my team for accepting the responsibility of receiving your emails to sign up for those subgroups. But do reach out to us. We do hope to make some progress standing up or finding members for those subgroups between here and the July 27th meeting. But otherwise, I do think we're a little short on time today, so we can probably conclude.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. This was a lot to cover. Somehow we got through a lot of it. More to come. Look forward to everything, all that we're going to discuss. And again, it's just good seeing you all, and look forward to the next meeting. Would you have any closing remarks?
No, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to, for a complex, meaty subject, but I'm optimistic. I think we had some good discussions to get started on what our task and challenges will be. And I'm looking forward to hearing some more about some of those solutions as well in the coming months. And when's the next meeting?
July 27th.
July 27th. All right. That's it for
Which
me.
is kind of a long way away, but that's just how it works out, I guess.
We have a lot to do before then.
Yes, well, that's true. Okay.
But you're right.
Good point. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.